Welcome back to the Music Teachers in International Schools podcast. I'm your host, Chris Kulmer, and in this podcast, of course, we explore the intersection between international schooling and music education. And today I'm speaking with Asta Hodgson, the head of music at the Prince of Wales Island International School. I had to make sure I got that whole thing in, and that's in Penang in Malaysia. And I have to start by giving some love to Penang, and we had a little chat before recording about some foodie things in Penang, but for me as a traveler, it is definitely one of my favorite cities in the world. And I did spend plenty of time in Penang when I was living in Kuala Lumpur. And I was one of those guys that I thought a lot about trying to buy one of the UNESCO World Heritage shop houses and like make an Airbnb out of it and live the rest of my life in Penang. But it never quite happened, but it's maybe still a dream there. It's a beautiful city for that reason. It's really interesting and cool, and we might touch on that throughout the interview. But, you know, there's also great food and some great hikes in Penang. It's a really cool part of the world. So we'll, again, see where we go and see where that comes up. But of course, this podcast is all about music education and international schooling as a context. So I think we should just get straight into it. Asta, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad you approve of Penang.
Well, it's hard not to. It is fun, right? It's a fun city.
It's a fun city. It's the Prince of Wales Island, of course, originally, hence the Powys concept. Hikes, beaches, sadly jellyfish, but the less said about that, the better.
Yes, that's right, because you have these beautiful looking beaches and then there's not that many people actually swimming.
Well, there are actually, but not me anymore, that's for sure.
Right. Okay, maybe we won't go into what happened. Sounds a bit traumatic.
It was incredibly traumatic. But yeah, other than that, it's nice. I don't want to be in KL. I don't want to be in Bangkok. I don't want to be in those big, overly kind of things, Singapore and whatever. But also I do, because like whilst it's really great being in Penang, it's really annoying to get anywhere else. So it's like, oh, look, Singapore's got Hamilton and Miss Saigon playing and so-and-so's going to KL. And it's like, oh, can you come and see the nice little island, please? They don't. But
you've got two bridges, right?
We do.
I love that. Looking at the map, if you're listening and you're like, okay, where's Penang? And you jump on Google Maps, there's these two bridges. And I remember doing a marathon on one of the bridges. But I just remember it being chaos because everyone went out on the bridge and came back on the same bridge and it was just a giant traffic jam. But there's two bridges, so you can get somewhere.
Every year, that exact same thing happens. It's not changed.
All right, let's get into a bit of your story and context because I think this is so important to set up the rest of the conversation today, which we're going to jump all over the place, and I'm really excited about where this conversation will go. But let's start off with your background as a musician and as a music educator. Take it where you like.
So, in the very, very early days, I'm not from like a musical family. I'm putting that in inverted commas because, you know, what does that even mean? I believe that we're all musicians. My dad was very keen on listening to music, still is, my granddad, and all different types as well. So I guess the kind of inspiration or the music just being around existed, even though it wasn't, you know, we're not the Von Trapps. And then so one day I sort of said, oh, I want to play a musical instrument. I went to school and they'd done like little showcases. And I mean, I don't remember it extremely well, but apparently it was kind of, I went home and went, oh, Mum, I'm playing the cello now. She was like, right, okay, you couldn't have done recorder or, you know, something small. So that kind of happened. And then I suppose from there, it was a very traditionally classical style thing where a lot of the stuff, you know, whilst there were choirs and there were, you know, I did my GCSE music and whatever, a lot of it was very instrumental based. Through particularly my love for playing the cello and ensembles and stuff like that. So that was kind of where it started. And then from there, I just carried it on, went to the Royal Welsh College of Music and Drama because I wasn't sure whether I was going to go off on the dramatic way or the music way. Both sides had said, oh, we'll focus on one or you won't get taken seriously, which is fair. So I went with music and then I got to another sort of, oh dear, what am I going to do now? Everyone had told me, by the way, as well, when I was growing up. So when I was playing the cello, when I was a teenager, sort of 14 years old, my teacher would send younger students, I'm talking sort of 7 and 8-year-olds, over to have like a bonus lesson on a Saturday. So they'd come over. That's where I got my first beer money. It wasn't beer money in those days. So it was a decent little pocket money. So thanks, Mum and Dad, for that. And everyone's going, "Oh, Asta will be a music teacher. Asta, oh, she's doing this." And I was like, "No, I won't. How dare you?" So I finished college, and then a friend of mine who was in the year above told me about this music teaching course that she had done, which sounded so much more my kind of bag than just a standard PGCE. And it was a 2-year PGCE, but also incorporated specialist strings teaching using Dalcroze, as well as looking at the secondary kind of aspect too. So I did that, and here we are.
Good summary.
They were right. The people were right.
Yes, they were right. And you think back and you're like, you were right.
You were right. You knew.
I like the drama aspect too. We hadn't talked about that. And so I'm guessing that still comes into your life in ways?
In ways, I suppose. I mean, maybe one of the things about teaching is that kind of aspect, I think. Like, when you're putting on, and especially with early years children, I'm teaching my year 6 and 7 music mentors. We've got a kind of leadership program. And they come in and do some songs and some music games with I call them the babies, the early years. And, they're sort of sat there and they want to play with the kids, and they're keen to get involved, and they don't really know how. And I'm like, have you seen any of those shows, any of that YouTube stuff where the presenters are all like, "Oh, hello, children." And they're like, "Oh, yeah." And I'm like, "Just do that. Like, literally just do that. There you go. Transported away to a lovely fairy tale land where the kids don't care. They just want a smile and some sort of jolly D going on."
Well put. So you're in Penang. What brought you to Penang, and what was the journey like to international school music teaching generally?
Well, it was, like I said, I'd done this super duper PGCE with young children, middle school children, primary children, string teaching, curriculum teaching, which kind of was so appealing because it meant that you could go absolutely anywhere with that. So I could do Perry work, I could do music hub, not hubs, they weren't hubs then, but whatever they were, music service, I think, go into primary, go into sixth form colleges, like whatever really. The one that I really, really, really fancied was the primary school music teaching. And a job came up which was not far from my parents' house. Obviously, I had nowhere to live at the time. So I took that, and I was really lucky in that was my first post. It was the one that I wanted. However, after 3 years, the redundancies came because the cuts came. And obviously, music teacher, specialist music teacher in a state primary school, you're going to be out. So I took the voluntary redundancy. And there were some things coming up on tests, and I have to thank my sister really, because I was saying, "Oh, I don't want to go to the international things. It's China and Dubai." I was like, I don't want to go there. And she was like, "Well, leave it on because you don't know what." And I was like, "Okay, fine." And then something pinged up, which was in Moscow, which was very much more appealing to me. So I went for a year. And then I moved to Yangon, and now this is my 5th year in Penang. So, yeah, it wasn't something that I'd always had my eye on. It wasn't like a life goal or anything like that at all. It was just opportunistic, I suppose.
Yeah. Can we go back one step? You said Russia, Moscow, and then Yangon. And was it a year at both or a couple of years?
4 years in Moscow it ended up being, and then 4 years in Yangon.
But you said you would stay a year initially. Was that what you were thinking? I gotcha.
Correct.
Yeah. Cool. And then 5 years now in Penang, Malaysia.
Yeah.
Got it. Quite the journey. Cool. And I mean, a question that we often hear come up and in conversation and things. What are you thinking? You're sticking around? Is the international school thing now your thing? Or are you like, I don't know?
Yes and no, if that makes sense. So kind of slightly more long term. I'm not talking about next week or tomorrow, but I'd like to help people in a more, like in the early years, for example, taking on that role as music teacher. I don't know, I'm looking at kind of like consultation and teacher training, stuff like that. I think would be a really worthwhile use of the things that I've learned along the way, somewhere to, you know, put it sensibly rather than just keep doing the same old thing.
Nice. Let's talk about early years, because it's come up already a couple of times, and it's probably for me the area I'm most interested in because I'm probably the least experienced in that area. So I love learning all the time about what makes people tick with early years teaching. What do you love most about teaching early years music?
I don't really know, and I don't think it. No, it has always been there. But the interesting thing is that people find this very odd when I admit to this, or when it is kind of, really, Asta? I don't very much like little children.
Okay, good start.
I don't want to have children at home. I don't like seeing them in the supermarket or even in the park. They're just quite annoying and loud and whatever. But I adore having them in my little area where we can just play and we can just have fun. So I guess there's that kind of malleability about it. The idea that I can say goodbye. We had a lovely, lovely try there. That was wonderful. Like I said before, all that kind of just making them feel special and happy and like they can be safe to explore music, and they're just so enthusiastic most of the time. I mean, it's obviously not all a bed of roses and rainbow unicorns flying around, but there is a lot of that where they just enjoy doing stuff, and it's really, really simple. And because it is so simple, you can then see the little steps. So there's a lot of repetition because there has to be, because that's what they need and want. And then you see the progression very, very easily. So like, I've got melodic instructions that I'll use in the classroom: stand up, sit down. And soon they start to recognize these as, you just take the words away. You can play it on an instrument and automatically they know what they're doing. And other teachers see this at work, where I just sing ba ba, and all the kids stop what they're doing and they stand up and they're like, what? How have you? Yeah, they're my little puppies. Like, they know what's going on. So yeah, there's an element of that, and just kind of knowing that it's going to start something for them. I think, because that's the thing that I feel. I love playing music. I love being involved in music. I want that for them, and if that can start way back, then how much better can that be?
That's really cool. I love how you put that. Let's go, I think, in a related direction, but you're going to have to help me here, because when we got chatting online and started talking about this podcast, you mentioned your master's, this dissertation that you've submitted recently, and you told me what it was about. And I've got the quote here, and then you can correct me if I get it wrong, but it was looking at entrainment interventions and how they can positively impact prosocial behaviours in reception-aged children. So, can you start off maybe by defining some stuff for us? So what is entrainment interventions, and maybe also prosocial behaviours? And then maybe just give us a brief summary of what this all is and maybe some of the findings.
2 years work, Chris. You want it in a
sum it up now. 30 seconds, go.
Right, go. I did make a song up about this actually when my friends asked me at the pub one time. Anyway, entrainment is at the really most basic level. You could call it synchronization, but it's temporal. It's to do with time, so it doesn't literally mean in time. So an entrainment of an anti-phase relationship would also be entrainment. It is a time relationship, basically. So if you're looking at your own self, when you're walking, you are entrained within yourself, because you need to have that rhythmic pursuit to be able to obtain what you want, which is to get over there. In nature, it exists as well. So even if you look at things like circadian rhythms, because they've got that element of natural time dependency, that is viewed as entrainment. More typically, I suppose, if you're looking at entraining with music, if you're clicking along with the music, if you're nodding your head to the music, if you're tapping your foot, if you are in a musical ensemble, you are entraining with those other people because you are communicating, you are listening. There are, really, really subtle, vague nuances which are happening within that. And it can be an audio thing or a visual thing. Yeah, all of the above. So it's quite a broad sort of topic, but at its very, very crux, I would suggest that some sort of synchronization and certainly an element of time. So yeah, that's kind of question number one. And then you were talking about the prosocial behaviours. So in training, and I'll give you an example of some of the ways that it's been measured. So even just tapping your finger. So like it could be an online study and we have to tap our fingers together. Like that would be us in training. Sometimes it's a bit more complex than that. Sometimes they've done like people walking together, people marching together. There's been work done in silent discos and things like that, where obviously you're in training, but you're perhaps anti-phase, like not together, not synchronizing. And a lot of this work has been looking at the effects on, there are four big ones: helpfulness, empathy, cooperation, and sharing. Different levels, of course. I mean, you've got different age groups that have taken part in this. It's a whole big thing, but incredibly interesting.
So if I can summarize a little bit back to you, and then you can tell me if I get it totally wrong. It's looking at, I think the key word that came across to me was time. That comes through in the entrainment. So entraining, things to do with time and how they impact those four big elements in young people.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So the interventions that I had, there was a control group, they got no interventions. There was a group that had movement interventions, and there was a group that had musical interventions, and a group that had music and movement interventions. I was looking at the impact of those interventions on the kids' sharing capacity, because that kind of incorporates all of those other ones. It's like you've got to have an element of empathy. You've got to be somewhat helpful if you're like. So I kind of chose sharing as the variable. So, for example, in the movement only one, there were things like yoga going on. There were things like playing not in the movement only, of course. There were like movement sequences. So, like, remember, we're going to do this. You do a star jump, then you do a roly-poly, then you do, so they had to do that. So they were doing it together. The music one was things like playing instruments in a sequence. So I tried to keep it as kind of similar. So it's like you are remembering a sequence, whether it's movement or music, and then the music and movement, guess what? It was combined. There was a story as well. So the movement one had to react. Oh, and then the Billy Goat's Gruff stepped over the bridge and they had to move like the Billy Goat's Gruff. In the music one, we sang, so we kind of went clippity clop, clippity clop, clippity clop, clippity clop. I think they were playing something as well at the same time. And then in the movement and music, they were doing the same thing. So there was different responses and different kind of interactions, engagement with the story. The control, obviously, nothing at all. But the only significant difference, the positive impact, was from the combined group. So the music and movement together did show, according to these results, that the sharing capacity was improved, potentially due to the movement and music entrainment activities.
Cool. Great. I think that made a lot of sense to me. I'd probably need to kind of go back and think about it a little bit more, but the result makes a lot of sense with what you hear around in general looking at early years music. Like people that always say like movement, music together, it's good, but you've
exactly.
You've been able to show that it's actually good for this particular thing of, sharing. So that's cool. I like it.
I've submitted it to a journal.
Ooh.
And it's currently awaiting reviewer feedback. So it might well be open for the whole world to see.
We'll have to keep an eye on that and obviously share it. And do you have anything that you can already share about the research itself, like any paperwork or any documentation?
Yeah, I mean, probably. off the top of my head, it's hard to say. But if anyone's interested, definitely. And I'm looking to somehow share, sort of pull together the resources that I actually used, because obviously I think the outcome shows that it's a potentially useful tool and resource for early years practitioners as well as music teachers. So I'm looking at trying to sort of pool all that and develop that and kind of have some sort of product or, something useful from it.
Let's take a left turn and jump at one of the other words you talked about earlier, which is Dalcroze. We haven't talked about it a lot on this podcast, but what does Dalcroze mean to you and how does that come into your practice? I know you mentioned something about the connection it might have with strings, which I haven't heard a lot about. So maybe you can talk a bit about Dalcroze and how you use it, and then how it might integrate with strings teaching as well.
So the Dalcroze, there are 3 strands. There's the eurythmics, which is the kind of, I suppose, the most famous one, like the movement bit. And yes, that is Annie Lennox, in actual fact. She is an honorary member of the Dalcroze Society in the UK. So there you go. And then there's improvisation, and then there's oral training. So when I said that I was looking at my PGCE, when my friend came to me and said, oh, this one's a bit more interesting than usual, this is the stuff that I was talking about. And it just, when I was training in it at the Royal Northern in Manchester, it just really kind of opened my eyes to reveal gaps in my own personal training. So like I said, I'm very, very, very classically sort of trained, from quite an old school sort of system. Show me some sight reading, I'm your woman, absolutely. Pop me in that orchestra, no problem at all. Ask me to improvise for a band or something. I've got absolutely no idea what you're talking about. Not for me, terrified, no. So it was just really, really amazing to find a way. Like I said before, I want people to have this opportunity or opportunities where they can enjoy and make music together, and to help them develop the skills which I didn't do. Like, that's just really kind of, it's special, isn't it? And it's, I've developed a lot through my own training as well. So yeah, the 3 strands. So it's basically really, really holistic. So everything is, there's a lot of sound before symbol kind of stuff. There's a lot of movements alongside your theoretical things. It's not really taught in a theoretical way. And there are links as well with other programs. So, things like your Kadai. I actually learned Kadai for my oral training aspect of the Dalcroze course for the certificate. The ORF stuff, the Emilio one, what's that?
Reggio Emilia.
Yeah. They're all very, very similar in this holistic and kind of doing this experiential thing, really, which I just think is really important. I'm that kind of person, and I want to be doing stuff, and I feel like it's just a really sort of impactful way to be able to develop musically, but also, it touches on so many other things, because you're then looking at your creativity aspects. It's looking at a piece of art and wondering, how can I turn this into sound? It's drawing on everyday experiences and making that musical. So, in terms of, you walk every day. Okay, well, that is your natural beat then, isn't it? Sorted, done. Didn't need to teach you anything.
And you did this as part of your PGCE. And I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but help me out here. There are levels you can do, like Kadai and ORF, etc. in Dalcroze?
Sort of. It's a little bit more extreme, so you can't kind of just go in and dip your toes so much. So the certificate that I've got is quite a lot of work, and then there's I think they fairly recently changed it, so I don't want to say anything wrong, but the ultimate bit, you do have to literally go off to Switzerland, and you have to be, it's like a Cornish pasty. It has to come from actual Cornwall. So to be like the big boss of the Dalcroze diploma, yeah, it has to be from the Dalcroze Institute in Geneva. So yes, there are, but also no. And you have to have the qualification to be able to call yourself a Dalcroze practitioner. So whilst you might be interested and take kind of elements and have Dalcrozian ideas or a Dalcroze style, you are not allowed to use them.
You mentioned just then creativity as kind of a key factor in what you like to do. What does that mean to you, and how do you approach creativity? I'm especially interested at early years. What does that look like for you?
The improvisation strand, I think, is really, really vital in that. So when you're looking at improvisation, it doesn't mean that you're going straight in at some sort of jazz level and you're going to go and play some gig somewhere. It is as basic as here's some rhythms that we've learned, or here is a long sound and a short sound, play for me. Even before then, even when you're looking at nursery and they're just playing with the instruments, they're making stuff up. And to encourage that is stage one. And then obviously you can nurture that and you can provide different things. Okay, can you only play the red keys, or can you only play the yellow ones? Or what about if we just play these three? Or, why don't you have a turn and then you take a turn, and they're having a musical conversation, these two kids, or you and the kid, or whatever. There are so many ways to employ it. So you asked about creativity. I spoke, vaguely about improvisation. So that's kind of, I guess, the ability to create. But what it also showed me was the ability to explore. So whilst you're not directly necessarily experimenting with an improvisation, if you're just exploring something that's different, if you're just looking at something from a different perspective, looking at a building and turning it into a piece of music, because you can see the structure, you can see the edges, you can see the colors, you can see the curves, you can see the grass, you can see the angles. Like, there's so much that if you put on a head, which is not a literal day-to-day boring human being head, you can see so much more. And that's kind of what I think is really important. I think it's really lacking in general life these days, to be honest.
Yeah, fair point. And I'm trying to think if I'm making the connection right here. When you introduced your background, you introduced yourself as, you started in cello in this kind of strict, if I get the word right, like classical training line.
Traditional, very traditional.
Traditional. But what you're saying now, like, sounds almost completely opposite.
But I experienced my creativity maybe didn't stem from the musical side of stuff, because if you remember, I was also interested in drama. I also took art. So I was already interested in these things. And then what learning about the Dalcroze method kind of did for me was tie it all together, which I didn't realize was quite so possible without being a songwriter or without, composing a piece of music.
So was the leap then to something like improvising for you as a musician made easier then? Or is it still two separate things and it's tricky?
Throughout our training, it's not this is how you teach, it's learn it.
Right.
So we had to do that ourselves. And the cohort that I was with was fairly similar mostly to me. We were all string players because, like I said, the other strand of the PGCE was the string teaching, which you did ask about for the Dalcroze stuff, so I can go into that.
This is what I was leading to. I was
so
let's bring it back in. Yeah.
Exactly. Because of that, everyone was in a very similar boat. There was one of my best friends now, she was a jazz violinist, so she felt less, stressed about it, but the rest of us come from quite classical backgrounds. So yeah, the idea of improvising, and especially some of us being on piano with it not being our first instrument, but as soon as just somebody gives you the tools, like you just can. So the Dalcroze and the strings, when I said about it being taking like natural things. So recently, for example, it was Chinese New Year, mandarins flying around all over the place in these parts. So I got the kids to hold the mandarin.
Oh, literal mandarin. I thought you meant the language of mandarin flying around the room.
Oh, flying around everywhere. Well, that as well. More Hokkien actually here.
Yeah, true.
But yes, it's Chinese New Year, so we've got the mandarins. They're all over the place. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to use them and just reiterate this feeling for playing the cello, right? Because you end up sometimes with this weird thumb going on or your fingers.
Sorry to interrupt. Just for those who might be listening to this, Asta's kind of like showing the mandarin in her hand, like, and then showing the different fingers. So yeah, continue.
Yeah. So, if you're squeezing the mandarin too hard, you're going to squash it and you're going to hurt yourself when you're playing your instrument. But yeah, equally getting that kind of thing. So rather than just talking about things, kind of showing it. Lots of imagery is really, really important. Just natural time and space. So if you're teaching about triple time, if you're teaching a waltz, get up and waltz, like feel it, do it, understand that heavy first beat. So it's just kind of making everything a bit more holistic, I think, than has perhaps been done traditionally. I mean, things are moving on. Like I say, all of these things have existed. Dalcroze came about at the beginning of the 20th century, so it's not a brand new, miraculous kind of cure, but these things, as we know, go through phases of popularity and trends, and depending on what the governments are doing with the arts and blah, 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 blah. However, I think that generally this creative approach to things is useful in everyday life, in everyday skills, in problem solving, in communication. Yeah, it's quite black and white to me.
I'm imagining, and I know from the community, we have members that listen to the podcast from all over the world, but also lots that are strings teachers. Like their role in their international school context is just teaching strings. And so you gave a couple of examples, like the one with the mandarin and hand position, hand shape, the one about waltzing and feeling that time. I'm just wondering if you have any more examples of how you apply this Dalcroze idea, this holistic idea to the strings classroom that you want to give us.
We've got balls. Balls are fantastically used. So again, that timekeeping thing of bouncing the ball or throwing the ball, to consider phrasing. So is it a heavy part, or are you losing that bit of nuance? Is it a throw up into the air, or is it a landing down? Also, in terms of bow speed, so rolling balls backwards and forwards to each other, whether you do that fast or whether you do that slow, is obviously going to change the kind of rhythmic integrity of what is happening to the ball, which can then be applied to, okay, we'll do the same thing with your bow. Put this much effort in if you want to use this much bow in this much time. For example, also the oral training. Oh, I always get my kids to improvise as well. So there's always some element of improvisation. And even if that is, or oral awareness, oral training, which again, I very much lacked. It was sight reading this and scales that, and here's your piece. Very much like an extended ABRSM exam.
Yeah, okay.
And so we'll always have some form of improvisation, and whether that is, like I say, an echo, but then they have to change the echo, whether it was in, within a certain tone set, if we're looking at learning first finger, if we're looking at learning ray or learning that tones or whatever. So just loads and loads of freedom so that no one ever feels stressed about that performance. It's a safe space. And when I say to them, who wants to have a go on their own, all the hands go up. And you have to do each of them.
Oh, that's cool.
Because they understand, because it's group lessons. And, I've shown them that actually you can hide in a group, but how are you developing then? Like if the overall sound is basically okay, but there's something not quite right, how do you know unless you hear yourself if it might be you? And then you can make that better. We can have suggestions, and they're all like, oh, I want to check.
Yeah, that's cool. So you've almost developed this culture of freedom and being okay and wanting to share.
Yeah, it can be quite intimidating. And, there are lots of benefits to learning instruments in the group situation. But one of those things is not going to be mastering that instrument. Like, you've got to be going home and practicing that. You've got to be having a self-drive to that. You can't turn up once a week to your cello lesson with 12 other kids and get good at playing the cello. You can have a nice time, you can learn musical skills, fine. But to just have that attitude of giving things a go and learning transferable skills like improvisation and performance is, it's this more sort of holistic education.
Have you seen that impact the wider curriculum at all? Like, I'm just thinking of other contexts you might see, say your strings players who have been improvising in their sessions, then join a band or do something else where they can then bring out those transferable skills. Have you seen that? Have you got any examples?
It's hard to say, because I do feel like sometimes the kids that are in it are in it. Do you know what I mean? It's the same with sport. So it's like, you know, parents will be like, oh, is there any potential? Is it going to be a brilliant thing? And I'm like, well, he's 10. If he's going to be brilliant at anything, he probably ought to be, you know, like at least have his own violin, like for now. And, you know, same as the sports ones. It's like, well, are you playing football at the weekend or are you just going to PE lessons? Yeah. Oh, no, I do it. I'm out okay, fine. Yeah, maybe potential. But the ones that enjoy it are certainly, they do things like join the one-to-one. So sometimes if they've started off in the OIP, that's the orchestral instrumental program, that's the group lessons that I'm talking about. There's a lot of them which have taken that and then gone, oh, no, actually, I do want to master this. I do want to be able to play in assembly and play down the market and all the other things that we do. I do want my busking license.
Ooh, hang on. Busking license?
Busking license, yeah. So we got a completely randomly, and I sound like such a spoiled brat when I say this, but the secondary school, because we're just up to middle school here in Tanjung Bunga, there's a secondary school in the other side of the island. And some time ago, it was facilities got in touch and went, oh, where do you want us to put this piano? I'm saying, what are you talking about? Well, you know, the grand piano that secondary don't want anymore. Huh? So I'm sort of racking my brain about where to put this. It's not going to get up the stairs. We don't have anywhere for it, but I'm also not going to say, no, thank you. I don't want this free grand piano. So we put it downstairs in the lobby and I introduced a busking license. So the kids that have something to play, they have to come and do a little audition. They get an actual, you know, like a proper license based on the London Underground one. They have to bring in a photograph and then they can show that and then they can go and play the piano whenever they want downstairs, which is really cute.
Oh, that's great. That's really cool. So they do a little audition, get their license, and then they have to like show that and go and play.
Yeah, they can just go and play before school or during break time or whenever they want, really.
That's really cool. All right. I've been wanting to ask this question ever since we got on this call. And again, if it goes nowhere, it's totally fine. But behind you, there is a sign on the wall above your TV.
Uh-huh.
It says, keep Steve safe.
Well, yeah.
Who's Steve and why are we keeping him safe?
Steve is Steve the mouse. He's the strings mouse, so he hangs around all the strings. And if you have a bad posture, you're going to squash him. And then it would be gross and Steve would be dead. So no one's winning in that circumstance. So, then again, so it's another sort of Dalcroze style thing, I guess, where they're really imagining that Steve is there underneath their hand or underneath their elbow. And then, they'll turn around to each other and they'll be like, you're squashing Steve! Stop squashing Steve! And if they squash Steve, I take away one of their posture points, which equate to house points. They get them free when they come in, 3 for each house. But when Steve is squashed, posture points go.
Is that a little picture of Steve, the mouse? I can't quite see it.
Yeah, Steve's got some family members here as well.
If you're listening, we're going to go on a little tour here.
Yeah, a little tour.
Get a close-up of Steve on the wall.
Can you see him there?
No, I can see some bass clefs. Oh, almost. There. Yep. Oh, there you go. Okay.
That's Steve and his little family. They're all called Steves.
Hang on, go a bit higher up. There. Oh, so it's like is it a violin? Yeah. And Steve, so there's all these little mice on top of the violin and they're going to get squashed. Got it.
Yeah, he plays in the F holes and he has a great time when people aren't squashing him.
Where did you get this idea from? This is awesome.
I don't know.
You just randomly go one day, oh, that's a cool picture. I'm going to make this whole story about it.
It's not uncommon. I think there's a few method books and stuff which have spoken, and piano as well, when you're talking about the, having something underneath.
Mm.
So I just sort of made it a bit more literal and meaningful.
Well, holistic, more tangible, more like creative, all the things you've talked about. I can see it straight away. I had no idea what that was, by the way. I'd been looking at it the whole conversation going like, who is Steve? Why are we keeping him safe? Or what's going on there? Well, we've covered a lot of ground. I've probably got 1,000 more questions I could ask, but otherwise we might be here all evening. So we might head towards wrapping it up. Is there anything else on your mind? Anything that we didn't quite get to? Anything you want to share? Any other thoughts, ideas, things that you feel the community might be interested in before we wrap up?
So I mentioned about the idea of trying to kind of empower early years practitioners and looking at one of the things that I'm really, really passionate about in that area is musical play. So Yeah, if anyone wants to talk further about that, or if you want to hear a bit more about it, again, I did some of it for one of my master's assignments. So, yeah, quite a lot of interest in that area because I feel like sometimes with early years, you end up with this, oh, it's just play, it's just play, it's just play. And yeah, it is, but obviously it needs to be properly guided and facilitated and I mean, assessed in the right way. I'm not talking about sitting down and doing SATs or Trinity exams, obviously, but an understanding of what's going on. So there just seems to be sometimes this idea of, oh yeah, they've got pots and pans to bang over there. That'll do. Really?
Hmm.
And the answer is no. But yeah, the answer is that it's very simple. You don't have to have a bunch of musical expertise to do it, but you do need to know, and you do need to have the confidence to start developing these skills. Like I said, the conversation, the musical conversations. If you're sat for 17 seconds with a child who is listening to you playing the drum and copying you, and then you're playing the drum and then you're copying them, then you've had a musical understanding. Like you've done something musical, but you might have to facilitate that in a way rather, so they're not just banging the drum. So yeah, there's a lot of research that's been done on this, and I'm happy to recommend some books or some experts or to share things as well that I've done.
That would be great. But I think maybe if we've got a tiny bit more time, maybe we can just explore this a little more because I think it's worth going there. So you're saying this maybe pervasive idea of musical play at early years being just bang some pots and pans and you're done. But you're saying can be, sure.
Yeah.
And you're saying, no, there's some things we can do here to make this, to facilitate this is the word you used. Can you maybe give us, and I think you gave us a couple of examples, but like where would you start with that? Is there a good starting point for like, okay, I want to facilitate some play-based experiences at early years. Let's go.
Yeah, it's the same as it always should be, which is the kids. So they show an interest. I want to play this. And so you have to, I mean, obviously, like the equipment.
Yeah.
So if you're there managing the equipment, however you want that done, whether it is a music area or whether it is music time or whatever you've got. And then I suppose the next thing would be the boundaries. So I've got 3 rules in my early years classroom, just 3, when they're doing their free play. And they all know them. They're simple enough that they can understand, and they're simple enough to have visuals up, at their level. So if they do forget, you can look over and reference. So that is, we share the instruments. We're gentle with the instruments, and integrally, we listen to our music. So if you don't like your music, or if you've forgotten to listen, if you're there just going like this mindlessly, are you listening to your music? No, I'm not. I'm just banging a thing. So listen to your music is really important. And of course, that means, that transfers for other people's music as well. And that includes the kids, it includes the teachers, whatever. And then just, let them go. So as much choosing as possible, but also with some consistency. That's really important. So if the kid goes in and they want to play that drum, which is always available, and suddenly the drum isn't there, that's sad and a bit stressful. Not the end of the world, but if you want to do a really, really good practice, then you need to, same as if you're teaching a module or whatever, you want to mix some things up and keep some things constant, especially when they're very small. They want this consistency. And I think internationally as well, it's super important because of the potential transiency that occurs in these kids' lives. You don't know where they've been before. If you can just keep that one drum that they love and they can see it every day, fab. If you want to add something and then they've got 2 things to choose from, fine. But yes, some element of change and mixing it up, but also something that remains constant, whether it's the time of day that they're open or, whether it's the teacher that is doing it. That's kind of important. So from then on, you just end up with play. So, when kids are playing, they might be doing some make-believe, some role-play stuff. If they're doing that with the musical instruments, using a xylophone for a phone, great. They're still exploring the instruments. They're still understanding what it feels like, how it looks like, different things it can be. Absolutely not a problem. Beaters go on heads as antennae, or they can be wands, or, whatever. But again, as long as everyone is respecting the instruments and each other, it doesn't matter. Anything goes. And then in terms of the musical stuff that then can start happening is that you sometimes see children playing, but also singing. So not forgetting that singing is a part of this play as well. So just singing to themselves, maybe they're performing to their friend, look at me, I'm Beyonce, or whatever. And all of this is completely important. The engagement of the teacher is play partner. That kind of, it seems to be the thing that the children prefer. So you could obviously sit and observe. That's not really the best thing. It's come out, like I say, various different research. That's not really something they want. They don't want you to interfere. But if you're invited to play, then you can play. And it's the same as correcting a technique. So if they've got something and you can see that, actually they would benefit from being able to make a nice sound by playing it properly. Like when they smack the glockenspiels and they're just without the bounce.
Yes.
Yeah, by all means, show that as an alternative, but don't get het up on it. Don't then show them, and then you play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Can you play that? No, not like that. No, use your other hand. It's just, they don't care. Like they'll get bored and they're going to stand up and they're going to walk away and you've lost them. Whereas if you just take that one bit, okay, I'm going to help you in this technical way. I can make a nicer sound now. And then the same as with any play, you can ask them questions. Can you play this sound? Can you play that sound? Can I have a go? And then you end up with this imitation, which is obviously an important part of musical conversation and musical understanding, and indeed entrainment.
Hey. And as you were speaking, that's where the facilitator comes in. I feel like you were just describing the facilitation role there. And it sounds powerful. Like I was picturing, as you were explaining those kind of steps and methods and ideas, I was picturing the room and what would be happening and imagining little groups going off and making their own thing happen.
Yeah, and that's it. So you've got little groups that will go off. You might have 2 kids who are best friends who are playing because they always play together. You might get some kid who's taken a xylophone off, or a drum, or a triangle, or whatever, and they've taken it off completely by themselves. That is absolutely fine. That is solo play, and they're exploring that by themselves, and they're walking around with the triangle slightly mindlessly, but also singing a little song, whether it's a well-known song that they've already done in nursery class, or whether it's something that they've made up themselves. There is so much that goes on, and all of it is valid. Kids that are watching, if you've got a kid that is sat back passively, but they're watching what's going on, they're still learning from those other children. They're still hearing what that sounds like and getting an idea of how to play that, or even social stuff, again, like how to engage, how can I try that? And it's another way, it's a form of communicating as well with those children that perhaps aren't very vocal or don't have the language, which again, in diverse areas, is give them the tools, even if it's for a few minutes, and they can choose, of course. So if they want to do it for 30 seconds, great. If they're not interested, fine, at that age.
Yeah. Oh, Asta, this has been so cool. And I feel like this is a really nice place to leave it. Again, we could probably go on a whole bunch of other journeys, and I've got lots more questions, but I might leave it for the audience to think about, and then maybe come back and follow up with you if they want to, ask you some questions. So
more than happy. I absolutely adore talking about this stuff. Such a geek.
Maybe that's the thing. What is the best way to get in touch with you, to talk like a geek with other people? Is it LinkedIn? Is it email? What's the best way?
Well, I've recently discovered LinkedIn, as you know.
Yes.
Got no idea what that actually means. There'll be a handle or something, but I don't know what that is.
Well, I think people just can look up your name and they should be able to find you. It's pretty easy, I think. Yeah.
Or you can email, or I suppose those are the most sensible ways.
Cool. Well, we'll find the best way and we'll put that in the show notes along with a whole bunch of other links. I'll probably be following up with you, asking for resources to this and that, and we can put that all in the show notes. But from me, thank you. Like, I love that conversation. I learnt tons, and we started all the way back at your journey and then Penang and a little bit of context of Penang and then this study that you've done, which is like a massive deep dive into a fascinating area, which is supporting a whole bunch of stuff that people are doing, then into the practical of what you're doing day to day, including the strings element, which is just so good. I loved sort of where
and
it
we
all
met
went.
Steve, of course.
We met Steve too. Yeah, which that just scratched an itch for me from the whole conversation. So again, if you're listening, go to YouTube and have a look so you know what we're talking about. But thank you. Thanks so much for taking the time. Is there anything else you wanted to finish with, say, or are we good to leave it there?
I think that's fabulous. Thanks for indulging my geek.
Again, I loved it and look forward to catching up in Penang or somewhere else sometime soon.
Hell yeah.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Music Teachers in International Schools podcast. Listen to other episodes by visiting mtiis.com or learn more about our community on Facebook by simply searching for Music Teachers in International Schools. If you know someone who you think I should get on the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. You can find me at chriskoelma.com, ChrisKoelma.com. See you next time.